welcome back to Scar Bears. Not Scar Bears, Scar Bearers, though bears with scars are really scary. I'm Chris D.T. Gordon. It is a blessing to have you here with me today. And as always, Nate and Britton Barron giving me the gift of their wonderful technological talents. If you want them to do their magic on your work, even though in Asgard, it's more science than magic, you can find them at Nate Barron. Well, folks, it's getting to that time where people are looking for speakers. If you know someone who wants the message of tag brought to them, please let me know. You can find me at linktr.ee/Chris DT Gordon. You can find my speaking websites, the book I co-authored, the Scar Bearers podcast, the YouTube channel, and some other delightful treasures. You can find it there at linktr.ee/Chris DT Gordon. Well, today I am blessed with the presence of a fellow NF survivor, Jennifer Borow. She's going to tell us about her story and the lessons she has learned from them. Jennifer, how are you today?
Today I'm great. I'm here. Today I wake up. I'm happy that I woke up.
You know, that's always a good sign. All right, woke up, check. That's the one first thing done. Mm-hmm. All right, and you are joining us from Cleveland, city of light, city of magic. So how long have you been in Cleveland?
I moved to Cleveland from Georgia, where I lived for 13 years prior, back in 2012.
Okay, all right. So you grew up in Georgia, correct?
New York.
Oh,
I'm all over.
Wow, you were just covering the Eastern time zone.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
If it gets close to Central Zone, I'm like, oh no, gotta go back.
Well, that sounds quite a story for another time. I don't think we have enough time to tell that story today, but we are going to get into the part where you and I share a connection through necrotizing fasciitis. Though when I had attained it, it was my first major scare. You are quite the warrior. You have dealt with a lot even before NF entered your life. Would you mind giving us a little background and then tell your story?
Sure. Well, I guess I'm a triple threat. Or I won the Triple Crown, one of the two. I am a survivor of breast cancer back in 2010. Before that, I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barre Syndrome, which is a disease that affects the nerves. So in my legs, it's ascending, the disease. So your nerve damage goes up. And a lot of times it can go from people's legs to their trunk, impact their lungs and their heart. And a lot of people are put on life support just based on, how their organs are responding. And, if the nerve damage is just that bad. Mm-hmm. I was lucky. It pretty much stayed from hips down. So I didn't have to go to ICU. I recovered pretty much just with basic therapy, PT, doctor's visits. The tests for it are painful. Nerve conduction studies where they put needles in your legs to see, just how you respond. Today, when I go to the doctor, it's like a constant surprise, though, as far as, am I going to have a reflex or not? So I've gotten them back a little bit, but it's kind of like a crapshoot. So you never know.
When you say you have nerve damage, is that you have lost the function of those nerve endings, or are there flare-ups where you feel the pain constantly?
Yes, to both.
Okay.
So yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
So as far as the nerve damage, I have neuropathy in my legs. Not so much on all of my feet. It's very patchy, if that's the right word. Sometimes the pain is unbearable. It was recently diagnosed after a 3-year search for a medical definition with fibro. So that kicks in with the fibro, and together they're really mean. So I've been, treated for that. And it does help the nerve damage as far as the pain. I was having problems walking about a year ago. So I'm happy with how things are going now.
I'm happy that you're at that point. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being normal, 10 being my legs are on fire, what is it like today for you?
Today it's pretty basic, just like around 0 to a 1.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I've had days where it's a 20.
Okay.
Where I'm bedridden for pretty much for the day or two until it starts to calm down. Weather bothers it. You'd think it was arthritis, but I've been seen by rheumatologists and they're like, no. So,
Okay.
it's really, it depends. Like if I do a lot of strenuous work, um, you know, up and down stairs or a lot of walking, then the next day I'm usually paying for it. But nothing's ever as bad as the pain during NF. So I can deal with whatever life gives me pretty much at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everyone who has survived NF, but you definitely feel like you can do something extraordinary when you've survived that. And so let's talk about that. How did that come into your life?
NF was unexpected, to say the least. I had recently gotten married. This is back in 2013 to the love of my life. We were pregnant and we were expecting a little baby boy in March on St. Patrick's Day of 2014. Well, I was 43 at the time he was born, and he came very early. He was just not happy with being inside. He wanted to meet everybody and be social. So we went in.
Some kids are outside kids. So yeah.
He was just like, I'm done. I'm fine. And they had a feeling he would come early. So they had him on the lung steroids to help development hasten. So when he was born, it was about 20 minutes from the time my water broke to we were pushing, but he stuck. So it was barely enough time for my husband to get to the hospital. So it was around 5 a.m. when everything started. And around 7, they were pretty insistent that we needed to go to the OR. His breathing was starting to slow. His heart rate was starting to slow. I guess his, oxygenation levels were going down. Not that he was breathing in there, but, come to find out his umbilical cord was only 8 inches long. And apparently it's supposed to be something you can lasso. So, he couldn't do that. So it was time for him to come out. And also I have a small pelvis. With being of advanced maternal age and all the ultrasounds they took, you'd think they would have figured that out prior to him coming out. So I was a little disturbed about that, but, we went in for an emergency C-section. It was a hard C-section. He was really jammed in there. So they employed a step stool, foreshadowing, if I had known at the time, in his delivery by standing on it to try to pull him free. So they finally got him. Poor little guy looked like he was beat up by Mike Tyson. His face was all bruised and swollen, but he was healthy. Took him a while to start to cry. He was stunned, and he was perfect, absolutely perfect. When they were closing everything up, I had some pretty bad bleeding and my blood pressure kind of went down, then up. So I had to stay in observation for 24 hours for them to put me on, not mercury, something. They put me on something for my heart rate just to keep everything kind of, of course I can't remember that now, but
I'm racking my brain too. I'm like, what is that? And of course the listener's saying it's blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yes, exactly. I know now.
2 a.m. I'll be like, Chris.
Yeah.
So they put me on whatever this drug was, and I had to stay put for 24 hours. He was in the NICU, and thank God for like tablets, because my husband brought with him the iPad. So he got to FaceTime me from the NICU so I could see our little boy, who was only down 1 floor, but I couldn't go anywhere.
Glycerin, was it glycerin?
No.
Okay.
I wish I could go, hey Siri, but
yeah. Anyway, I don't want to derail the story too much.
Yeah, something it begins with an M. Anyway, so I was fine. 24 hours later, I got to go downstairs and see him, fully ambulatory. I walked down the hall to the elevator, walked into the NICU, spent hours. And this was pretty much in play for a few days. They had me stay about a week. The second day I was in the hospital, which was Tuesday, the second full day after he was born, I had a fever and it spiked pretty high. It was like 103 and change. So they were like, oh, well, here's some Tylenol. $10,000. Thank you. Okay. Wow. So they gave me Tylenol and it would bring the fever down. But when the Tylenol wore off, guess what? Went back up, right up again to 103 and change. So this went on for a couple of days, like, oh, you're better. Oh, it's back. Sorry to disappoint you. And my ability to be ambulatory started going down. I wasn't able to walk that far without pain. And I checked with the OBGYN and they were like, oh, it's probably just, a little vaginal infection or uterine infection. It'll go away. You had a lot of bleeding. You're fine. Okay. By the end of the 5th day, which was Friday, I was only able to get down to the NICU by wheelchair. But I'm pretty speedy and I have good arms. So I was down there visiting with my son as much as I could. My mom flew in from California where she lives and actually had a ticket for the day he ended up being born. Not that he was even scheduled for him to come out that day. It's kind of like the stone roll away. Oh, there's Aton. So
Yeah.
She was already in town. So she would come to the hospital. We'd go to the NICU together. My husband would come to the NICU and we all just, I was learning how to do all the stuff you do with a newborn because I had no sisters, no brothers. I babysat, but not for something that tiny. He was about 5 pounds when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, he could fit in doll clothes. It was ridiculous. But he was the biggest baby in the NICU. There was one next door to us. The baby was about 15 ounces and just broke apart. And the baby was super early. But when we were leaving at the end of the week, baby was fine. Okay. It was great. And I checked, we went back to visit with nurses eventually, and that baby was great and survived, was still there, was big, healthy, strong. You're always concerned when others are in the hospital kind of going through what you're going through. It has that commonality to it that you can kind of really grasp onto. Well, they sent me home. Aton came home a week later. So in the meantime, I had a number of doctor's appointments for the pain. It was increasing terribly. It felt like my insides were being eaten. And I was totally gaunt, pale, couldn't eat without eventually getting sick just on my own. My mom had to help me before I'd fall down. We took 2 flights of stairs up to my apartment and I was at the top and she grabbed onto my shirt to make me go forward again because that would have been a hard fall. Yeah. And the time and heading to the hospital was greatly reduced. It was a 20-minute drive and we'd get there. And by the end of it, I was only able to spend maybe 15 minutes with him. And then I'd have to go home because I was so ill. My doctors came, they would look and they'd be like, oh, well, you just have that little uterine infection and, everything's great. Here's another antibiotic we'll try. Okay. So he was born on February 2nd, which was Super Bowl Sunday. I always say I caught the ball. Touchdown. Borow team touchdown. And this is going to the 13th. So the 13th of February, which is a really long stretch to not have this diagnosed, he came home. So we brought our baby home from the NICU and he was fitting right in and, just awesome. And the next day I had a follow up with the doctor because I called the day after I had been there. And on Thursday, the day he came home, and I was like, something's not right. I can't anything, something's really wrong. So I go there and I guess that's when they saw the first sign of NF where it was kind of obvious. They saw some obvious sign, something to do with my C-section scar. So the only thing I can think of is, after researching and being involved in the NF community really heavily, is there's a lot of time black discharge or black blistering. So I, having just had a baby, couldn't see my C-section scar, but the doctor could. He's like, I'm going to get an ambulance. I want you guys to go across the street, right across from the hospital. My husband's like, you can call the ambulance. We'll be over there before that. So he took me and they stuck me in observation. This was about 2:30. About 10 o'clock that night, after not really seeing anybody, the OBGYN partner of the doctor who operated, and I've seen her before, she's really my guardian angel. Her name is Dr. Yolanda Thigpen. And she was
That's
just
a great name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That wonderful
at it.
name.
I will never forget her. She works for Cleveland Clinic, and she's my angel. And she came in and said, we're gonna run a couple of tests. And I don't remember if it was an MRI or a CAT scan. So they run me down, and I'm waiting there for half an hour. They do the test. I'm in my room. Everything's taking forever, and they have me on morphine, which doesn't work. So I'm in full pain. 10 minutes later, she's in my room with about 20 other people, and I'm like, something's amiss. What's going on? So I'm half out of it. My husband's like, what is going on? Because these people are like pulling the rails up on the bed and moving me. Yeah. And she's like, well, and she was kind of talking to my husband, but I heard her, and I had gone to medical school briefly. So I was familiar with what NF was, but only by reference. So she's telling my husband, the scans show that there's a very large pocket of infection and gas in her abdomen. We need to take her to emergency room now, or the OR now. We think it's necrotizing fasciitis. And I'm like, doesn't sound good. I don't want another surgery. That was my concern. I didn't want another surgery because I just had one. I had a baby.
Yeah.
I don't want an operation.
They're not like trading cards. You don't want to collect these.
I'm like, enough already. So, like, have you all seen my insides way too much recently? You want to see it again? So they rushed me down into the OR. I say goodbye to my husband. I'm in tears because I know what it is, and I know how deadly it can be. And I have a newborn baby at home and a new husband, and my life's kind of in the balance right now. I'm in other people's hands as far as if I'm going to survive. Turned out after the surgery, she told my husband that I had about a 10% chance of making it through 24 hours. Oh, wow. And if they had not caught the infection that day, I wouldn't have been around the next evening. Mm-hmm. So that was enough to scare him, my mother, everyone else we knew. Surgery was okay until I woke up on the table. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, that does not sound like something I want to do.
No, it felt like hot pokers in my abdomen. Anesthesiologist, I kind of looked at him. I'm like, can't breathe because, intubated. And he's like, you're not supposed to be awake. Doc, she's awake.
He didn't grab a club and put you out again, did he?
No, he just turned up something and out I went. I woke up the next morning, not knowing what I had, what the definitive diagnosis was. I was awakened by two interns or residents, I guess they were residents, telling me to hit the button on my morphine button, or whatever the painkiller was they had me on they were going to change my bandages. Okay. Now, I had no idea how much they had incised. I had no idea what happened. No idea what they're doing. They start pulling out stuffing and stuffing and stuffing. I'm crying. I've never felt such agony before. And it was to keep debriding the area, removing all the infection that the packing material, sound like I'm going to UPS, all the packing material that had soaked up all the fluids from my body and everything like that. They kept me open. The scar went from one side of my hip on the front, from my right side, all the way across to my left side. So the wound itself measured 34 times 10 times 8. So
34 times, that's 340. Let's see, 225. Let's see.
Check you out with them.
20? Yeah, something like that.
So it was big. It was huge. And they didn't close it because they wanted to keep an eye and make sure they got all the necrotized tissue. I finally saw a doctor later on who told me what was going on. But Dr. Thigpen, before they knocked me out in the OR, leaned down to me and she goes, "You're a fighter." She goes, "I need you to fight as hard as you've ever fought before in your life. You've got a baby at home, brand new, still shiny. You've got your husband's out there. He adores you. You have to fight." She goes, "Promise me you're going to fight as hard as you can." I'm like, "Okay, I will." And I was dead set. That's it. I'm beating whatever this is. Mm-hmm. So they kept me in a regular operating floor or on a regular operating floor, surgery floor. They didn't put me in the NICU. Mm-hmm. So about 2 days later, it was the weekend. Actually, no, it was the Friday when I went in for the surgery. So this was about Saturday. It was the next day, Saturday night. The days just kind of blended at that point.
Yeah.
I had swelled up from my hips down and around my lower abdomen. And I had all of a sudden, I had thrush. So they called the resident on duty. It was a holiday weekend, Super Bowl. So, and Valentine's Day. So a lot of the doctors and surgeons were off. So the main hospital surgeon, head of surgery, his resident told the nurses, oh, well, she's on enough antibiotics that if she's got a sore throat, it'll go away. Oh, don't worry about the swelling. It happens after every surgery. Not like that. I had cellulitis again, which is initially how the whole infection started, was cellulitis around the surgery site. So the infectious disease doctor comes in the next morning. He takes one look at me and he's like, you have severe cellulitis again. I'm like, yeah, think? And he looked at my throat. He goes, you have thrush. I'm like, well, apparently the antibiotics should help that. So he changed everything I was on. There was a big confab in my room between the head of surgery, residents, and the infectious disease doctor and the mediator for the head of surgery, just arguing. And I'm like, can you guys do this somewhere else? There were a lot of issues with my aftercare that I had at the hospital, which led to working through the ombudsman to have folks retrained. They would not clean my room or my linens after a while. The maintenance people wouldn't come in. I was at the end of the hallway.
Oh, wow.
They just left me. And when you have a wound like that, that's fresh, and they're changing the bandages twice a day, meaning reaching inside of you and grabbing bandages that have been jammed in there with care. There was a lot of bleeding and there were blood trails in my room. I couldn't walk on my own. I was trying. I had my IV tree and all that stuff, but a lot of retraining was done. There were some job losses, unfortunately, but I felt in the end that was the retraining of certain folks to be more alert, to be more considerate, and to realize that unless you stick your hand in my abdomen while I have NF, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
A lot of people think, oh, don't touch me. There was concern after I got home. Well, what about the baby? Baby's fine. Baby doesn't have NF. Baby was
Not
out
contagious.
before. Yeah, baby's good. Baby's awesome.
Yeah.
So after 2 weeks in the hospital in horrendous conditions, they let me go home. So I had to have my stuffing. I had to have my stuffing changed. I had to have all of my bandages
With cranberries or just plain?
I like the sage, but sometimes it's a little much.
Yeah.
So always a little extra. Yeah, absolutely.
Got that tang.
Exactly. All twang you get.
Yeah.
So I had to have home health people come, but they would only come once a day. And I don't know if that's just what my insurance authorized or what. They were all working it out together. So here's my husband of, a few months, who's finishing his education for his second degree. He actually he had two. He had an MBA and a bachelor's, one in psychology, one in social work. And he wanted to, start working with medical labs after he had a massive stroke. He wanted to see if he could try to identify any indicators or precursors that would allow someone in blood work to take a look and go, there's this thing again, I'm finding this common between stroke victims. So he was in school, and he had to learn how to do everything for me that the home healthcare people did. I would cry every day because when they did my stuffing changes, I was it was so painful. You tune out. I was able to kind of just put it away, talk to my mom, talk to whoever, talk to the baby, talk to, the nurse person, because I was interested in what they were doing and I wanted more information. When he would do it, I would cry. I'm like, you didn't sign up for this. You're elbow deep in my abdomen.
Yeah.
This isn't what we had planned. I'm so sorry. And he'd look at me every time with his gloves on and everything and his mask. And he'd just say, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met. He's like, and I signed up for you. And if it hadn't been for my mother, who decided she would take over baby duty 24/7, she ended up staying, instead of a couple of weeks, she stayed a couple of months.
Wow.
Just to help. And my stepfather actually came out too, and he was with us for like the last week or two that she was staying with us. But if it weren't for them and my husband divvying up duties in the home healthcare people for, you know, everything they did, I would have been relegated to a nursing home. And they don't really understand necessarily how to treat the spiritual and emotional aspect of NF, let alone the biological aspect of it or physical aspect. I found that having those things to really focus on, the baby, my husband, life, I had a good job, anything I could find positive, I really hyper focused on, because I didn't want to think the opposite. I didn't want to start focusing on woe is me, poor me. And I've never done that in my life. Even when I had breast cancer and, you know, the Guillain-Barre, I was like, no big deal. I'm not the only person to get it and I won't be the last, but I'm not going to let it get me. And that's kind of how I was with NF. I wasn't aware of any kind of groups for it. You never hear about it. I was familiar with Amy Copeland, who was a survivor in Georgia, because I lived there at the time.
Yep.
And,
oh, really?
you know, yeah, she was, and I remember the story and her father doing updates on the news. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, sending good thoughts and good vibes to her. I ended up meeting her years later after my experience. And it's so true to focus on other people and let other people focus on you as needed in order to kind of reset yourself.
Yes.
Sitting in a big pot of woe is me, you know, I almost died, blah, 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 woe is me, is not good. You're simmering in it. You're going to boil in it. And it's not healthy. My attitude was really good. I was cracking jokes. And I started having a hard time emotionally with it. And I did go to therapy. And they did kind of like a rewalk through NF, which I really wasn't planning on or looking forward to, but going through every day that I was in the experience and living it, to try to unwrap some of the trauma that I had experienced, because I was having nightmares. I was being sawed in half, you know, just lots of stuff. My son, we're Jewish, and my son, he was really, you know, he was 6 weeks early. So he was very young when we brought him home. And between that and my NF, you know, having been so recent as well, we weren't able to have his bris for about a month until they closed. So when they sent me up for the closing surgery, I talked to the anesthesiologist after she introduced herself, and I pretty much grabbed her by the collar and I said, "You're not going to let me wake up."
You're going to knock me out.
Exactly. She was really sweet and nice. And I told her, she's like, oh my, she goes, no, you'll wake up in here. You'll wake up in recovery. Everything will be great. You won't know anything that's going on. I'm like, perfect. I love you. So I just make sure to tell people every time, you know, I have a surgery, because I've only had one after that. And that was a reconstructive surgery that was voluntary, that I went through to kind of deal with scar tissue. The surgery that they do to save your life is not pretty. They don't hire a plastic surgeon to build you a new tummy or to carve out some abs. You know, you're not getting a breast augmentation. You're not getting squat. So it's pretty much get it up, get it out, and close.
Yes.
But they didn't close. So, you know, when they did close, there had already been a lot of nerve damage and scar tissue and everything. And that was fine. I didn't care. And they didn't even really close the whole way. You could still see the wound because they needed to make sure it was going to close on its own. So I went through months of cauterizations, chemical cauterizations with silver nitrate, which is not comfortable. I don't know. Did you go through any of that?
Not, I guess not at the concentration you had. But I did use I did use a lot of silver based products, but not silver nitrate. I used like a lot of silver solvadine on my wounds. And then also I had actually, I just talked about this for another an interview where I was the subject. I had a compression vest that was that had silver sewn into it.
Oh, wow.
And so I use silver in that way, but not Not silver nitrate, no.
Yeah, that was the one of the surgeons that was in on the operation, because apparently there were a team. It was like a gang thing. I don't know. So it was a party in the OR that night. But the doctor that I had seen after and kept seeing for a number of months, usually weekly, I had to be cauterized because the wound wasn't closing on its own. You know, and they also had to take off little bits of tissue here and there. And it was a long physical recovery, probably from start to finish, including the reconstruction surgery. I'd say 2 years.
Okay.
About 2 years. Just for me to get back to where I was. I was septic when they found the NF, and I had a lot of brain repercussions. And I've talked to some people in the community that say, oh yeah, my memory just kind of went down the hill or downhill. Mine apparently went for a walk. So I had trouble with remembering things from one room to the next. Not like I lost my keys, like, okay, the operations manager wants me to put together a newsletter on such and such and such and such. And I'd walk in my office and totally forget we even had the conversation. So there were a lot of issues there. I ended up losing that job because of all the trauma and physical issues I had from the NF and the surgeries and being under general anesthesia so much, which was unfortunate. But in a way, it was really good because I was trying to move so far away from that experience with
so it was
NF.
kind of like cutting ties, you know,
It was.
to move forward to your next chapter.
Yeah, it was all part of the healing process. Not that my job had anything to do with me getting it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Able to kind of write a clean slate. You know, and it was the three musketeers. It was my husband, my son, and I, and his two girls, who were just amazing the whole time and just so sweet. And they're both, one's in graduate school, one's in college right now. And I couldn't be more happy that they're in my family and I'm part of theirs. And part of the biggest thing, I think, as far as a challenge to overcome, if you find you or someone you love are diagnosed and fighting NF at the present time, is finding support. There's really no commercials for call the NF Foundation for, you know, such and such.
Yes.
You know, it's like American Cancer Society, everybody knows it. There's a lot of different, you know, medical groups that are very seen a lot on public television and heard about on the radio and every publication and all this other stuff because they're popular and they raise the most money. NF is kind of the redheaded stepchild. There are no medication commercials that you see for that. You know, you have watery eyes and all this other stuff that you never see, like, you know, the miracle drug for NF. It's
a really good comic book origin story, though. However, you don't see a lot of commercials for radioactive spider bites or being caught in a gamma explosion. So you're right. Exactly. It's not as well known.
No. And it's funny because it's so rare that people get it, even though it seemed like in the years surrounding the year I had it, you heard about it everywhere because people were in Florida were getting it and people in Texas were getting it. People going in the water were getting it and fish and all this other stuff. They were eating fish and they were getting it. It was just crazy, but my experience wasn't like anything I had heard about before. So I was able to, just out of curiosity, on Facebook, check out groups like the one you and I met in. And I started visiting one that ended up being run by the NF Foundation, or Necrotizing Fasciitis Worldwide Foundation, that started domestically, and it hadn't started even yet. So after a couple of months, they asked me to be a mod because I was so involved in the group and being a positive reinforcement partner to other folks that were new and coming in. I'm like, you need anything, you just let me know. And just talking them through it, talking to survivors' families, talking to families of those who didn't survive, which is a really difficult conversation, but they need the support of other survivors to know that it's okay. It's okay to grieve. You know, it's a lot of people don't understand the disease. A lot of people don't even know what it is. And it's so important that not only the survivors are supported, the families, because they go through the trauma just as much as we do.
Yes. My wife, when some time had passed after my situation, she started telling me all that she had gone through. She and my brother had flown in from Michigan to spend time with us and help out the family. And it was, I wanted to sign her up for therapy, for support group, because it is she was automatically, one moment part of a team. Second, next day she was a single parent essentially. And so it is a huge shift. And yeah, that support can be huge for not only, like you said, the survivor, or the victim, it's sad to say, but also for the family of.
Mm-hmm. And it's nothing that their loved ones didn't do right or anything wrong that happened. It's just, that's the disease. It doesn't pick and choose. Once it has you, it has you. And it depends on the skill of the surgeons. It depends on, and with the surgery, for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, there is no miracle drug for NF. It's not like when they find it, they can start pumping you through of all this other stuff. It's more preventative medication after they've taken the infection out. And then removing the bandages over and over, repeated surgeries are debridement. And that just makes sure that they're removing any of the other dead tissue, they're sloughing it off, they're getting rid of it. So the tissue will granulate, get pinker and pinker, and then the wound will close. I didn't have a wound vac, which, after I learned about wound vacs, I was like, really? My wound was huge. I never had one.
That's surprising.
Very strange. Yeah, I wasn't too surprised. Being that, it had been a rough go. But, once I was able to support myself, by that I mean walk on my own. I had problems with orthostatic hypotension. And one night and this is a couple months later, this was April, my stepfather had come into town and everyone had gone to bed. The baby was in in his crib, and my husband had put him down. And I was like, I'm okay. I'm going to walk to the bedroom on my own, which I hadn't really done. Probably shouldn't have, because I the hallway and I'm like, this wall looks really cool. I kind of lean my face against it. I'm like, oh, this wall feels so good. And then boom, I went down. So I ripped some stitches, had help. My mom was flipping out. Where's the baby? And I'm like, where's the baby? Everyone was, where's the baby? My husband's like, he's in his crib. Shush, he's sleeping. So, but I mean, it's without that team that helped me up off the floor that night, I don't know what I would have done without them. The emotional toll it takes on you is heavy. Whether you're in the midst of the infection, after the infection, or the family of the person who had the infection. And it's so important. I don't recommend medication to anybody, but I do recommend talking. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be someone who's impartial to the emotional toil you're going under. I wouldn't recommend.
I just want to, just say something to that, because they have their own cross to bear and their own struggles to deal with. And so, yeah, you want someone who's removed from the situation to step you through that.
Yeah, because I could have talked to my husband, but like your wife, Chris, he had gone through his own process and his own feelings and emotions, and, saddling him with that, or like him saddling me with his, wouldn't have been healthy, wouldn't have been conducive to a full recovery. So, while the physical took about 2 years to mostly overcome, emotionally, I still deal with it. Mostly on anniversaries. The group that I started modding for then became the one of the administrators of, and then eventually secretary for the foundation once it was established. A lot of times, they talk about, what was I saying? Oh my gosh. See, brain fog. A lot of the support and everything everybody gets is from each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the biggest connection. Had I found the group immediately after the experience and survival of NF, it probably would have helped. Yes, help, no. Those kind of groups are really raw in, they talk about everything from surviving to death to wounds. And while it's a positive experience for everybody who's in that group, to the most part, for that type of group, it's more important to focus on you're here now. Mm-hmm. And getting over your fear of going to the doctor. I had white coat syndrome terribly after that. I was so afraid to see it. With funny note, when they did the reconstruction surgery about a year and a half later, I was still open where the disease had tunneled through almost to my hip. Oh, wow. So yeah, plastic surgeon's like, oh, by the way, I went in, I tied it up a little bit. I'm like, okay. He's like, I had to do.
I was here, so I figured I'd just close that up.
Exactly. There was some overgrowth over here in your yard, and, it turned out it was a huge pothole. So I filled it in for you. So he did. He went into the tunneling and he did several layers of stitches that would dissolve. So they wouldn't obviously come out. But, now, I mean, I'm me. Nothing's ever changed about myself. Nothing has ever changed who I am at my core. I've always been a fighter. I believe that we're all here for a reason. And if talking about it for so long was part of my reason in helping others heal, it definitely helped me through my healing process as well.
Yes, now, I wholeheartedly agree that, by sharing our story, we might not only help ourselves heal and move forward, but that might be the one story or the one piece of advice that someone else might need. Mm-hmm. And so that is a treasure right there, Jennifer. So I appreciate you sharing your story. Now, what are you doing now? You said you're still the secretary of that group?
I actually left the group and the role as secretary. I was at a place in my therapy where I was ready to let go and let someone else do it. I found myself, while helpful and the connections I made were lasting, and I was able to provide other support, it was kind of like rehashing my experience every day. And I was in the soup again, and I didn't want to be. So I figured at that time, it was a good time for me to kind of make a break, and make a run for it. No, I'm kidding. But make a break from it and not simmer anymore, which I felt at that point, that's what was happening. I didn't want to be stagnant. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to move on. Not that you can ever move on from NF, mm-hmm. but you can make the most out of your life, because that's really the best revenge you can get on that disease, is to live your life to the fullest. Just like with any disease that's life-threatening, you have to make your life yours and reclaim it. And that's what I was trying to do.
Yes. And it sounds like also that it was becoming a point where NF wasn't just part of your life, it was becoming your life.
Yes.
And you already survived that once. You don't want to do it again.
Pretty much. Yeah. And, I didn't want what I was doing in the group, as far as providing support and talking about it, to become something I regretted doing, or felt was dragging me down. And I thought, I want to leave it at a good place and just step away. Who knows, I may do it again. I'd love to moderate another NF group at this point. There's one out there I'm a member of that's a mama's group. And it's all women like myself who either during a natural childbirth or a C-section or something like that, in giving birth to their child, had to battle this as well. And it's amazing the strength that these women have. I'm amazed by each and every one of them. Their fortitude and their attitude is amazing. And I'm lucky to be part of that circle of women.
Would you mind sharing the name of that group? Maybe some of our listeners would like to check it out themselves.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it right now. I'm hoping I'm not going to lose you, Chris. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
Okay, good. Let me find out here. Okay, so
And then
here. Well, there is the Scars United group, which is fantastic. Let's see here.
yeah, the people listening in the podcast know nothing has changed, though the people watching the YouTube video are saying, "Oh, she changed into her name."
I changed my name.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Oh yeah, Necrotizing Fasciitis Worldwide Mamas.
Okay.
So it's, it's a fantastic group. I highly recommend anybody who's relating to that experience of dealing with childbirth and then immediately following up with this winter, join, because I was amazed how many people have NF or have gotten NF in general. I'm even more stunned by how often this happens during childbirth, which I never really heard of anybody else going through it in the other group that I was in, where I was a mod and then an admin. So important to realize you're not alone, whether you've gone through it yourself or it's your family. Neither of anybody, no one involved in this is alone ever. There's always someone to reach out and talk to, and for families to be able to reach out as well and get that support and understand more about the disease, why it happens, which really is indiscriminate.
Yes.
How
I got it from my garage
recover.
wall of all places. So yeah, I mean, I don't mean to scare people, but at the same time, it's not like, hey, that's the thing you get NF from, and that's it. No, it's not like that.
Exactly. And it's not like everybody who goes in to have a baby has to worry about this.
Yes.
According to the hospital, it's a common bacteria that's on your skin. That didn't help. I ended up, the type of NF I had was streptococcal gangrene.
Okay.
So when I felt like I was being eaten from the inside out, that's exactly what was happening.
Exactly what it was. Yes.
Yeah. And they couldn't see it because it was against my abdominal wall. And that's why there were really no signs until it was almost too late.
So the wisdom you just imparted, Jennifer, that sounds like the answer to a question I usually ask, and which is, what is one thing that you want our listeners and viewers to take away from our conversation? Would that be it, or is there something else you'd like to share with them?
Positive attitude is everything. You may have days you don't give a hoot about your positive attitude. You feel angry, and it's okay to feel that way. Just don't let it consume you. Be angry at the doctors, be angry at the circumstance, be angry at time you've missed with family. Make it up. Yes. Look at every sunset for me is one more day I've lived through. Every sunrise is a new one I'm going to live through. Every little moment you have, make note of it in your head. You don't have to take photos with your phone. You don't have to take a video, write everything down. All you have to do is remember it, because that right there, those moments are what make life worth living. And if you don't look, you're going to miss it.
Yes. Good advice from Ferris Bueller there. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
So where can people find you, Jennifer, if they want to get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook. I don't have like a public page or anything, but if you find me, I'm just under my name, Jennifer Leslie Borow, Borow. You can always do a message request and I'll check it out. More than happy to respond to any survivor, any family member of a survivor, or someone who's lost a loved one. I'm also in the Mamas group and Necrotizing Fasciitis support, and then the Scars United group as well. So, I'm more than happy to, at this point in my life, be there again for other survivors and help them as much as I was helped by other folks that went through NF just like I did.
I greatly, on behalf of all NF survivors and their families, I greatly appreciate you doing that, Jennifer. That is such a huge tool that people can use, to help them with their recovery and their battle to progress forward in their lives. And so
Thanks,
one more
Chris.
thing you're welcome. One more thing I have to ask though.
Sure.
And it's a question my audience always loves to learn the answer to. What is your favorite dinosaur?
Tyrannosaurus Rex, because I always imagine him trying to like do things with his tiny little arms that he can't do, like reach the top shelf in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Bowling is another one. Trying to do cross stitch and see what he's doing because his arms are so tiny and his little head is so big. How is he going to see to do his counted cross stitch? It's just not going to happen. So I would say T-Rex.
Yeah. If you're happy and you know it, no, you don't.
Swing your tail.
Yeah. And we laugh at him, but at the same time, if he were alive, he'd eat all of us. So it balances itself out.
Yeah, we'd all be appetizers to the greater meal.
There we go. Well, again, Jennifer, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. I greatly appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Definitely. And so if you want to reach out to Jennifer, you can find her at Jennifer Leslie Borow on Facebook. If you want to find out what I'm up to, again, you can go to linktr.ee/Chris DT Gordon. You can find the podcast Scar Bearers and the YouTube channel. You can like, subscribe, share, because Jennifer and so many others have great stories that can inspire you to make the most of your day. You can also check out my online store, Chris DT Gordon's Tag and Pop store, Tag and Pop Shop. Oh, it sounds so good in my head, and then I mess it up in my mouth.
That's most of the time with me. So
exactly.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So you can check out the shop to see what inspirational hats and shirts you'd like to buy. You can also look at the book that I co-authored called Blue Talks Presents Business, Life, and University Volume 3. You can check me out as a speaker to find out how my message could serve your community and your audience. All that stuff and some freebies as well can be found at linktr.ee/Chris DT Gordon. Oh, yes, Jennifer, it is a cornucopia of awesome free stuff. Please go check it out. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great day. And remember to pass on perfection and go for greatness.